Hello, everybody. Welcome to Profiling Evil by Mike King. It is choir practice, and I am really excited about the group we've got together for tonight. This is such an interesting time in our country and world, quite frankly, as we sit and wait for the jury who's out on the Derek Chauvin case, and hopefully we'll get an answer. Frankly, I kind of hope that it takes until tomorrow just so that we can get through the night and not have any kind of problems with the groups of people that are starting to organize. But it is really an amazing time right now. To our mods, Miss Sophia, Mimi J2, thank you so much. Appreciate you coming in and moderating tonight, taking care of things. Hello to Jeff W. And gosh, you're just streaming in now. It's really exciting to see you coming in. And it looks like JRS is here, who's our sponsor tonight for the Diet Dr. Pepper. Whew, thanks. The back office appreciates it. I certainly appreciate it. Feeds my habit. And thanks again, JRS. We're going to kind of keep that up down in the corner. You know, it's National Victims' Rights Week in the United States. And this is really an interesting time because if you think about it, every single year, there are about 3.5 million people over the age of 12 who become victims of violent crime. Now, if we took that number, again, that's violent crime. And then if we added property crimes, that adds an additional 13.5 million people who are victimized every single year by crime. And so what we thought would be kind of fun to do tonight, and we would invite you periodically, we'll put it up in the window, is if you've ever been a victim of crime and you want to anonymously share a little information about that, you can follow this link on the screen or hold your phone up to this QR code. We're going to leave that up for a second while I just talk through this. But if you hold your phone camera up, you can follow this QR code and enter a little bit of information. It just talks about if the suspect in your case was arrested, if they were convicted, and just kind of the general area where things happened. And then if you want to write a little bit about what happened, we test drove this a little bit in the last couple of hours, and we've had a number of people jump on and put some things in. Hopefully it's been a little helpful for you, but we'll check it out during the show. We have this really cool map dashboard that we built where we can watch in real time as you're filling this out. So again, don't put your home address, but just put the city you live in or the region that you're in, and it'll pop up with a really cool map. And we'll look at that. Well, I want to immediately bring in my guest co-host tonight. You've met him before, but I want to bring in Chief Jonathan Lewin, retired from Chicago Police Department. Welcome back, Jonathan.
Thanks, Mike. Great to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you here. Now, Chief Lewin spent decades at the Chicago Police Department, and his background goes on and on and on. Today, though, he's working for the largest broadband network for public safety in the world, and it's called FirstNet. And their responsibility, and tonight it might get tested, Chief, is to be able to stand up when there are huge crowds and major events happening, and it guarantees law enforcement communication throughout the event where some of the rest of us may not have it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the nation's dedicated public safety broadband network for first responders.
Yeah, it's really cool. Well, and I want to bring in Jonathan with us tonight. We have two really amazing people. First is Anna Garcia from True Crime Daily. Anna, how are you?
I'm great. How are you guys?
Oh, I'm doing well, and it is so exciting to have you here. And I'm going to just bring in David Mittelman at the same time. We're going to just start chatting, and maybe we're having a connectivity problem there. Maybe we need FirstNet in here right now. But I
think so. Ask the chief.
Yeah. So
tech support is closed. Sorry, Mike.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Isn't that always the case?
That's always the case.
Just crazy. And if I had glasses on or something, and my pride would allow me to get glasses, I need bifocals, Anna. And
they're called progressives, Mike. Not bifocals, progressives. Get with the program, okay? That's what I'm wearing.
Don't I need to?
Right, and there are no lines anymore. It's seamless.
And
You'll love
does
it.
your head really not hurt? Do you get used to it pretty fast?
Yeah, it does take some adjustment, like with everything else. And these are special for my podcast. Like the doctor had to make a pair of glasses just for the podcast so I could read my notes and see the screen clearly. But then I have and these are progressives as well. Then I have other progressives, which are for like every day. Yeah, it's ridiculous how many glasses I have.
Yeah, because you actually need a lens that you can see the screen like
Yes.
24, 30 inches away, right?
Yeah. And I do have contacts as well. And some people like complain on our podcast and on YouTube. They're like, oh, I don't like Anna's glasses. They're weird looking. Like I look like Dame Edna or something, which is fine. I have contacts. I just don't always love them. So I wear them on occasion, but I like glasses. It's a fashion statement.
Jonathan, I've never seen you in glasses. Do you have perfect vision?
So far, knock on wood, I don't know how long it's going to last.
Really? Oh my God.
We'll see how much longer though.
How would that be? In fact, the last couple of years on the police department, Jonathan, my vision was getting just bad enough downrange that I'd end up when we were at the 15-yard line shooting 2 or 3 extra rounds into the target, so that I didn't have to shoot him at the 50. And usually when there's so many people lined up, you could get away with that.
You had some forgiving range instructors.
Well, so Jonathan, if you've watched True Crime Daily, this podcast is one of my favorites, and I was shocked. I didn't realize it had reached 4.5 million subscribers on your podcast channel. That is phenomenal.
Yeah.
What's that been like for you to go from TV into this world of podcasting?
This is much more fun for me. And this is much more real than I think my years in television news. The great thing about my background is that it made it possible for me to always be able to have a conversation live with the world falling apart around you. As a local news reporter, you're constantly live, and everything imaginable is happening. Your office is, those are the streets of LA or whatever city you're working in. So that was great training to be able to make sure that you can deliver the facts quickly and accurately under all circumstances. But the thing is with television news, which I think is the reason that very few people watch television news, is that it's so stilted, and now it's so biased on whatever side. You just can't. Everything's become opinion. It's not as enjoyable. It's a giant corporation. News, I've always said, has been controlled. I know I sound like one of those, but yes, I do believe that the news is controlled by just a few corporations in this world. And that is not the best way to find balance, accuracy, and all of the things that I think are important. So I love the podcast and the interaction. We don't do it like this though, because we record our podcast. And, what people may or may not know is that the podcast really came from the TV show Crime Watch Daily. And I was a correspondent on Crime Watch Daily. It was the best job I've ever had in my life. I loved it. I traveled the country for 3 years. I was never home. It was the best assignment ever. I've never been so happy in my life. And so we started growing the audience from Crime Watch Daily and putting all of the videos and our reports both on the website and then on our YouTube channel. So that's where our YouTube channel started growing. Then at some point after the show went away, and it went away because it was canceled. It's like, it was just one of those, it was a very complicated reason that it was canceled, but it was canceled. So then we had this great website with so many hits every day on the website and the YouTube channel. Then we had to have a slight name change. So then we became True Crime Daily. And then they launched a podcast, and I joined the podcast a little over a year ago. And so we already had like a few million followers. And since I've joined them, we've had almost 1.5 million new subscribers, which I'm really thrilled about. But I love the interactive nature of this, of podcasting, of being on YouTube. I much more prefer it to what I used to do. Oh, look at this. Yeah. So that's us. And what we do is we have the weekly podcast, which is True Crime Daily, the podcast that comes out on Fridays. And Mike, you were a guest. But we also have the continuing videos of some of the cases that we did on Crime Watch Daily. And so we play them, especially if they are unsolved. with the hopes of getting them solved. And it's very interactive. And anyone who follows me on YouTube and that show knows that I do read a lot of the comments and I do respond to a lot of the comments. And I also patrol for nastiness. Unnecessary meanness is not permitted. You can have dissenting opinions. You can say, well, that's a dumb idea, but you can't call someone else dumb. Like, that is not okay with me. You can say it's a dumb idea. You can say, I think that opinion is dumb, but you're not permitted to call me or anyone else dumb, especially our guests or any of the other people on YouTube, because that's just wrong. I don't tolerate it. So I look for it, and it's really important. Hey, who's that? Who's MH? Love Anna. Listen to her all the time. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Verification that I do respond. Yes. See how lovely all these folks are. I want everyone to have a place to have an interactive discussion about a crime case with differing opinions, differing perspectives, everybody seeing things differently, and having a place where you can all hash it out safely.
Yeah, Jonathan, how many times would you have enjoyed having someone that is just as direct but actually kind interviewing you when you were sitting in the chief's chair? I mean, that's the thing I think I've always liked about you, Anna, is that you're hard hitting and yet you're really a good storyteller. Oh,
thank you.
And I like your comments about, being unbiased too. I think that's just so important. And it does seem like so much mainstream media now is biased in one way or another. So I loved hearing you say that.
And I'm allowed to have opinions when we do the podcast and on shows like this, because this is not what we're on now. This is not a news program, right? So there are some liberties where you can do some speculation and have some opinions. And I prefer that. But I just, I don't like things that call themselves news when they're really opinion. And if you're opinion, then just say it. If you're news, then stick to the facts.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Hey, folks, we're with Anna Garcia of True Crime Daily, and I recently had the opportunity to be on one of Anna's podcasts. I'm just so grateful that she came here. This is a woman who's won, I was thinking 5, but it's 8 Emmy Awards. I looked at my note, 8 Emmy Awards. That's amazing. 10 Golden Mics, and you've been named TV Journalist of the Year 5 times. That's like the record, isn't it?
I think someone's trying to break my record. I need to find out that person. I got to figure out what they're up to. No, at the time it was a record. How's that? I think that's the fairest thing. I have not looked recently to see if anyone else has beat me on that. But, I always took my investigations really seriously. And Jonathan, or Chief, I don't know how to refer to you. That when I was in local news and I was chasing the politicians, and also, I will tell you that the former police chief was not a fan of mine, without question.
Which one was that?
God, which one is he?
Well, the last one.
Former LA chief?
Yes, I put him in my rear view mirror.
But not Bratton, though.
No, not Bratton. Although Bratton was, Bratton and LA were not a good fit. That's my personal opinion.
Was it Charlie Beck?
Yes.
Had to have been Beck, because it's Moore now, right?
Yes, and Chief Moore, I think Chief Moore has really, it's been a challenging few years here in Los Angeles, but I think he really, and because I get a chance to interact with him because I'm on the board of an LAPD charity, which is called Hollenbeck Pals. And so what I love about that is I get to grow my relationship with the LAPD. And I also believe really strongly in something. If you're going to bitch about something and you're going to complain about situations in your neighborhood or in life, then you need to be part of the solution. And so that's what I do at Hollenbeck Pals. Like, I want to be part of the solution. And one of the things that we have is a diversion program. And, while everyone's talking about how funding is used for police activities and for police departments, one of the things that's really important to figure out, and is not easy, is what you do when you have a very young offender and it is his or her first offense, nonviolent. What do you do with this person? Is there an option? Is there a solution? Is there a program? Is there a way to give them a second chance, to divert them, to give them an opportunity to really think about what they've just done and maybe save that person from a life of crime? And so that's why I'm involved with the program I'm involved with, because to me, that's where I think is a potential solution to some of the many problems that we have as neighborhoods and communities. And our diversion program is really, it's a pilot program for the rest of LA. It's not in the rest of LA. It's only in this, little area. But here's what we require. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on diversion, because again, this is the greater conversation we are having in this country, is what do we do to have a better relationship between neighborhoods, communities, and police? And so let's say a young person, and we're talking about a minor, nonviolent offense. So let's say it's like a tagging, maybe a vehicle, something involving damage to a vehicle. I'm not sure if car theft depends, because that could be a felony. Do you know what I'm saying? Again, lower crime. The arresting officer and then, the sergeant or the captain has the option to offer our diversion program to the minor and to the parent. That's if the responding officer feels the need to do that. I mean, some people feel very strong. It's like, that's it. You're going, you're out of here. It just is in policing. So what we do then is you sign a contract with the minor and you sign a contract with the parents, and both the parents and the minor have to attend weekly classes for about 12 weeks together and separately. And the purpose is everything. It's mental health, it's counseling, it's figuring out what's going on. Is there a problem at school? Why are you hanging out with these gang members? Do you need and when you graduate, you get a certificate. And our success rate, even though we're tiny, is more than 70% of the kids who graduate this program do not go on to a life of crime. And I think that's a really big deal, but COVID has completely turned this thing upside down. And I don't know how you feel about, programs like that. Obviously, it doesn't apply to everything and doesn't apply to hardcore.
Take a stab at that, Jonathan, because I know Anna, Jonathan, and I worked with a fellow who was an assistant chief in LA, Sean Malinowski, and you probably worked with Chief Malinowski because he really led that effort, especially a turn under Chief Beck, if I remember right, but led that effort of we can't arrest our way into a better, cleaner city. We have to change and support. Jonathan, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, 100% agree. I love to hear that 70% didn't become recidivists. I think that's great. I'm a huge proponent of evidence-based policing, and you just demonstrated the evidence. And as Mike said, I got to work with Sean Malinowski here in Chicago for a couple of years. We developed a program in conjunction with University of Chicago Crime Lab that was about using information, using data to try to determine what interventions have the greatest efficacy on reducing and preventing future violence. So this is the kind of thing that I think is really exciting and that departments around the country, I think, and I hope, are going to start looking more closely at.
Yeah, I mean, again, but I think the only reason we also work is because we are so small. We work in such a small one station, one precinct, and we have a partnership with the University of Southern California, where we get the master's students in mental health who are getting their master's. They are interns for our program to help work as case managers for these kids and their families. So they get on-the-job training, real on-the-job training in a real life situation, obviously supervised. And so we feel like we work because we're tiny. And I always fear that if you took this program and you grew it and you tried to replicate it, sometimes when things become too big, you lose control of it. And then it stops working, right? It becomes decentralized.
Well, and not only that, but also just the scalability of the intervention services becomes a challenge. And that's what we experienced. We had a program called Custom Notifications, where we would, instead of putting somebody in jail, we would try to visit them proactively with a social service provider and give them opportunities of access to a range of services, whether it was education or childcare or other social programs like you talked about. The problem often is just how do you scale that up to where it needs to be?
Yeah, and I don't know that that's a solution for our greater issues that we're all facing, but on a community level and on a neighborhood level, I think it's one of many tools and potential solutions. So while I always feel like all I do is talk about these horrible crimes but I never get to have a deep dive conversation on what is causing crime and what is causing strife. And so this is what I do with my own time, with my private time, with my personal time, is trying to make a difference that way. And I learned so much, and I love our captain and our commander. And it's, I always ask them how they're doing, and it's a tough time. It is a very tough time right now.
Yeah, it is a tough time for policing, and we're seeing that play out even right now. Anna, I know that your time's short, but I want to bring in someone that I wanted you to say hi to before.
I do, yes.
Before you leave off. So, folks, I'd like to bring in Dr. David Middleton, who's the founder and CEO of Othram. This is a biometrics company that does DNA sequencing and genomics. But, David, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, so happy. I wanted you and Anna to be able to chat and maybe ask a question back and forth or two. And then I thought we'd spend some time when we say goodbye to Anna and talk about DNA solves and what the great work you're doing there. Sure.
I'm a huge fan of David's. David has been on my podcast, on my program, and it was a case that he and his team had helped to solve. It was something like a 40-year-old cold case, if I recall, yeah. David?
46 years. It was the murder of Carla Walker. So we worked that case with the Fort Worth Police Department, and it was very exciting to share the story. And obviously, I hope I can come back on and share future stories.
Oh, absolutely. You always have an invitation, as do you, Mike. And now, Jonathan, I know you.
Awesome.
Please come and join us. Join us on the podcast. I was joking that I stalk David on Twitter, but I do, because he's always posting what cases they're working on, what they're close to solving, or what they've solved. And it always blows my mind. It's so fascinating, the work you do. And what I love about your lab, Othram, to me, that is the most fascinating, is that you say that you take the most degraded of the DNA out there. You take the DNA and the testing samples that no one else will take, because that's your specialty. And that to me is incredible, because that's the big gap. Like, that's where we're missing the information. It's in that degraded DNA.
Yeah, we don't want to leave any case behind. The Carla Walker case that I told you about, that case was tested at other labs for some of these advanced techniques, and the profile was never built. It was impossible to get any profile from it. And so when it came to us, there was very little DNA remaining, and we don't want to leave a case behind. We also just don't want to waste budget and evidence. So we've perfected basically getting the most information from the least amount of evidence, and through consuming the least amount of budget. And so that's kind of our goal. And we'll also run the good cases too. I always tell the law enforcement folks, you've got lots of DNA, I'll take that case too. But we don't want to leave any cases behind. So if there's a case that is really challenging, it's failed other methods, maybe got rejected because it wasn't a good candidate, we want to take another look so we can get the most that we can from the most cases.
It's interesting to me, Jonathan, I called David, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. We actually had one of the folks who listened to Profiling Evil reach out and say that they had on their own gone and recovered what they believed were some burned bone remains of a loved one. They were working with the local police department, and the police department didn't have any budget to be able to test those bones in hopes of extracting some DNA. And David, I mean, you're a pretty darn busy guy, but you peeled off on a weekend, and we chatted through this case and talked about what the challenges are. And I think that's really a remarkable marker of what kind of person you are.
Oh, thank you. I mean, we have a team of 20 at our lab, so we're not giant. We're a small group, but all of us are maximally passionate about trying to to help as much as we can. I mean, there's kind of three things that weigh in our mind. One is we don't want to let a case, go unsolved. The other is we want to get involved if we can, before it gets consumed using the inappropriate or inadequate methods, and then the evidence is gone forever. And the other thing is, like, one thing I've started to notice as we work more and more of these older cases, it's like, it doesn't matter how old the case is. We have another case that we did that was even older. It's a girl that drowned in a pool from 1966 under suspicious circumstances. Every one of these cases, the world moves on and things continue, but the families never do. And in every case, there's been someone that's wanted to know what happened. Certainly people that were very excited to learn an answer, even if it was not the answer they were hoping for. And so there's a sense of urgency in that people don't live forever. And so you have these cases that are straddling, the 70s and early 80s, where there are folks that are still waiting today for an answer. They cannot wait forever. And again, the evidence only gets finite. Every time you test DNA, you're destroying it. You're consuming a piece, and you don't get it back if the work doesn't come out, with a positive outcome. So that urgency, and then our overall, kind of just desire to help out. We're all pretty fired up about trying to help, and we'll take turns manning the phone lines. And if it's a weekend, it's a weekend. We try to do the most that we can, like I said, for the most cases.
Yeah. Well, I want to give Anna a chance to ask any question that she might have. Maybe even Jonathan a chance to ask Anna any questions, because I promised Anna that I'd get her she actually has a meeting with the police department tonight that she has to get to. So let's do that.
Yeah, you don't want the chief calling you.
No, I don't.
No, we have a great relationship. It's really lovely. Actually, I have a question for David, and this is, we've had a few offline conversations about this. It's a cold case that I'm personally passionate about, because when I was a young reporter, this is a case I covered. So the 30th anniversary of this missing boy is coming up, and it's from South Jersey, and the little boy's name is Mark Heimbaugh, and he disappeared in the 80s. And he just vanished. And it was right before Thanksgiving. And it has always broken my heart that the authorities have never found him or found out what happened to him. And many different agencies have worked on this, and the FBI got involved, and there have been all sorts of, diversions. The only thing that remains, and this is the part where I think David could help, but I think maybe he can't because of the situation, is that there was a sneaker of his that was found on the beach. He went for a walk because he saw a fire and he wanted to look at the fire, and his mom went to the store, and because of the fire, traffic was routed. So instead of being like 15 minutes away, she ended up taking 40 minutes to get back. By the time she got back, Mark was gone, never to be seen again. So the one thing they found on the beach was his sneaker. But think about it. It's the 80s. They think we have a missing child. Rather than preserving the sneaker, it was picked up, brought back by a young cop and said, "Hey, is this Mark's?" Everybody touches it. It gets touched 1.5 million times. And I'm not exaggerating, because I found one of my old stories and one of my original stories. And in it, there's this video of someone dropping the sneaker for the purposes of the video. Okay. And it's not bagged or anything. If there's any DNA on this sneaker, David, is it possible, after all these decades and all these people who have touched it, now that everyone looks back and thinks, oh, dear Lord, if only we had done things differently, what, if anything, can be done with this sneaker?
Well, there's certainly DNA on there. I think you bring up a good point. There could be a lot of DNA just because there could be other folks that touched it. On the optimistic side, they probably didn't all touch it in the same place everywhere all at the same time. So, if there are swabs of many different areas, if you were lucky and perhaps the person that took the child was either bleeding or sweating profusely, and maybe some of it got into the inner part of the fabric, which is maybe less or into the seams, which might be less likely to be handled or touched by folks that were just walking around with a sneaker. This is something where a good experienced crime scene investigator can kind of look at the evidence, and it's like, okay, everyone's going to grab the shoe by this side, so we don't want to go over there, and maybe look for some areas where it just may be less commonly touched by folks post the loss of the event. But on the bad side, it's also possible that if all the DNA is mixed, it can be very challenging to deconvolute. I have a 7-year-old, and and his shoes fall off even when he's not, even if I don't touch him, his shoes fall off. So
right, and they
it's
think
hard to know. It's hard to know.
happen.
Like, it was a kid clumsy like my kid, and the shoe fell off? Was it forcibly removed? If so, is there an area or a seam that was touched? So I think perhaps swabbing, areas that are less commonly handled, and maybe looking to see if there is DNA, and if so, if there's a mixture that's sortable, and then if so, and if they have any idea of maybe who might have touched the shoe, they could try to eliminate folks that they know had touched the shoe, but actually worked on behalf of law enforcement. I mean, it's hard for me to say anything without, it's hard for me to say anything without being able to look at the case file. I'm speculating, so please take everything I say as a grain of salt. But those are the kind of things we would look at. Is sometimes evidence does get handled excessively, particularly prior to like the routine use of DNA testing methods.
Yeah, it was a different time. It was a different place.
Yeah.
And it's not like, you found an article of his clothing, perhaps on or near him, and there was some blood. It's a sneaker. It could have fallen off while he was running, or he was being pulled. We don't know.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, my son loses his sneaker all the time, and no one touches it. So, but the thing is, the other thing is that these newer technologies, they're actually a lot more sensitive than anything that's come before, and so that can be good and bad. Like, as I've said before, we can work from super tiny quantities of DNA, but the bad news is that we can work from super tiny quantities of DNA, and we'll pick up everything. I mean, a sneaker like that, it'll pick up everything. Everybody that touched it, if an animal walked over it, if some bacteria grew on it, like it literally picks up everything. These techniques that we have available are so sensitive, they pick up anything that has DNA, which is pretty much anything human or otherwise has ever been alive at some point in time. So, you'd have to look at the case. It sounds like a terrible case. And I wish I could tell you we could do something, but without seeing the case file or the reports, it's just hard to know. And I think there would be some front end work by the state lab to see if there is an ability to collect DNA, or they could send it to a lab like Othram and just do basically an exhaustive analysis of different spots. Even when we work with fabric, or even with bones for that matter, we'll generally sample several areas, particularly if we suspect mixture, to minimize the chance that we end up with an unfavorable mixture. So even in our lab with our routine casework, we'll sample many spots, develop many DNA extracts, quantify all of them, and look for the one that is most likely to bring a promising outcome. So it sounds like it's a lot of work. It's worth a try, but it would be impossible to know if there'd be a positive outcome without really checking at first just to see if there is DNA that remains, and if so, how many contributors to those different areas are for the DNA.
Well, thank you, David. I appreciate it, and I'm gonna keep working the prosecutor and the police department and see if I can't get all of you together.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to talk to them. Just don't want to overpromise.
Of course not. Thank you. I appreciate it.
That's amazing. Well, Anna, thank you so much. I can't let you go without first seeing if I can get you to commit to coming back again.
Okay, I can do that. Yes, I can do that.
and folks, please check out Anna at truecrimedaily.com. You can follow her on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Go to the YouTube channel and make sure you're subscribing. It's always found at Anna G News is the easiest way I've always found you, Anna. Anything else that we should know?
That's it. Podcast comes out Friday, so look forward to it. Hope you guys join us. And it's been a pleasure meeting you, Chief. David, great to see you again. Mike, wonderful to see you again. And we'll see you again virtually, I guess.
Yes, we will. Thanks so much, Anna. Safe travels tonight.
Thank
Good
you.
to meet you, Anna. Take care.
Thanks. What an amazing person. And boy, by the way, thanks to MH for that kind donation. We also had a wonderful donation from Lily and Gail. And folks, if you have any questions for David or Jonathan tonight, just put them in below. But we're going to start right off. Matthew Moss wants to ask, can you test soil samples, David?
You can. There's going to be a lot more than just human DNA in a soil sample, but you certainly can test soil samples. Sometimes powdered remains of bones and other material. We've even taken 40-year-old gauze that's basically disintegrated into dust and gotten DNA off that, probably because there was some blood on that gauze prior to it disintegrating. So you can get DNA from a lot of things.
That's so, Jonathan. I didn't really get a chance to tell everyone much about David, but this Othram Inc. is a biometrics company. Are you in the Fort Worth area or Houston?
We're in Houston. We're actually in the Woodlands, which is like a little north of Houston and about 3 hours from Fort Worth. So
this idea of DNA sequencing and genomics to identify human remains is really interesting. The genomics, I've always wondered really what the definition of that is, and I probably should know because before I retired, we were collecting DNA. Of course, back then it was so rudimentary compared to what you do, but maybe you could talk a little bit about that and then help us understand what DNA Solves does, because I think that's the most exciting thing. Is you found a way to leverage social media, all of this powerful technology that's online now to help scientists and crime fighters kind of pioneer this area of forensic genomics. So explain it and explain what DNA Solves does.
Okay, well, just to give you a quick background on the company. So my background is genomics, obviously. And I worked on the first human genome project. This is like in the 90s, and have basically I tell people I'm a one-trick pony. Like DNA testing is all I've ever done. So primarily biomedical and clinical diagnostics. And so the idea behind genomics is that you're doing exhaustive examination of all the DNA that you have, looking at all the markers within that DNA, understanding what those markers mean. What does it mean for you? How can you use those markers to determine how you might be related to others, and so on. What Othram does is it leverages this advanced testing to collect more information from crime scenes. So, the CODIS system, which is a traditional forensic framework, is based on capturing 20 markers, and it's an exceptional tool for tracking repeat crime. So you commit a crime, they index you with the 20 markers. If you commit another crime, they can match those 20 markers to the 20 markers. What's happening in our scenario is that we take cases that have not been solved with CODIS. Perhaps it's a victim, like the person we were talking about earlier, Carla Walker. Her perpetrator had not been caught of a crime. The person we talked about from Pennsylvania, Beth Doe, who later was identified as Evelyn Cologne. She's a victim. She's never been identified. These folks weren't in CODIS. And so what do? So Othram has developed a genomics tool to basically capture tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of markers as opposed to 20. And we're doing this from evidence that's been historically unsuitable, or considered not good enough. You hear those stories of not enough DNA, too degraded, whatever the situation is. And so we are the only company in the United States that does this entirely in-house, and we've basically vertically integrated, step by step, each process to do only this one thing. And this is all Othram does. Othram does nothing else other than human ID from these forensic evidence types. So we're highly specialized. We can only do one thing, but we do it really well, and we can work from quantities and qualities of DNA that no one else can tackle. Now, DNA Solves is kind of an effort that we developed to engage the crowd in what we're doing. And there's a lot of interest, obviously, from the crowd. You can see that in for example, this show that you're doing, in all the true crime stories and podcasts and documentaries. People are interested. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to let people do more than just discuss the case, but maybe have a hand in helping us work the next case. So it's a way that you can, talk about cases, surface cases that are important, that maybe historically have been challenged because of technology or whatever the case may be. Sometimes it's just funding, and help bring these cases to light, number one, that otherwise wouldn't get featured. A lot of these are not famous cases. These are cases that no one knows about, but they otherwise wouldn't get worked if we don't draw the attention to them. And then the idea is to use a combination of crowdfunding, and you're right now looking at some of our newest cases that we're trying to crowdfund. So anyone can get in and help. For the price of a Starbucks coffee, you can help drive a campaign towards completion. The other thing people can do is volunteer data. You hear a lot about this idea about opting in. If you've tested with a consumer genomics company then you have data that you could share, and we're all distantly related one way or the other. All three of us are probably related, just probably not very closely. And your data point could be valuable in helping identify someone that's been lost to time. We have a whole variety of cases, some that are very old, that get solved with very distant relatives. And once you know who the person is, then there's an opportunity to figure out what happened, to seek justice. How do you seek justice for a homicide victim if you don't know who they are? So that's the second way, is you can donate your own data and volunteer it in to come join us. And the third way is, as you're doing here on this episode, is you can just share the news about cases that resonate with you. And I got to tell you, we've had some cases where we just sharing the information about the cases has led to a solve. We have one case. This is a story I always tell. We have one case that was solved in 48 hours, and it didn't require Othram at all. We started doing the publicity around it. Law enforcement mentioned that they're going to work with Othram. They surfaced the details of the case, and I kid you not, before they mailed any evidence to Othram, we did nothing. Someone said, I think it was a tattoo. They're like, I recognize that guy. And the family was alerted, and they said, that's my family member. And they were able to match with traditional STR testing and solve the case. So the thing about DNA solves isn't that there's necessarily, we need to do, this records research and genealogy, or we need to do this or that. The thing is, we have a toolbox available of ways to get a case solved by alerting people to the fact that the case exists, sharing the details, getting folks to opt in if they think they might be distantly related, crowdfunding, all these tools available. And I kind of see it like a big toolbox. And the law enforcement folks can pick from the tools and use whatever. Every case is different. They require different tools. We had one case where we were kind of stuck on the case, and we figured out where the person was from. You kind of did a biogeographical analysis, figured out where they're from, where their relatives are from. And I kid you not, we targeted Facebook ads to that part of the country. And again, there was this like high profile publications on the case. No leads come forward. 9 days after we target Facebook ads, all of a sudden someone comes forward and says, that's my coworker. And so it's just amazing what you can do. Obviously, my background is genetic testing. That's how we predominantly bring these cases together. These older cases are confusing because you have a missing person, you have unidentified remains, and generally they're separated by geography or time. Like, for example, they went missing in one place, but they're found somewhere else. Or they were reported missing at one point in time, but they're discovered way later. And so that disconnect in geography and time is what makes it hard without DNA testing to connect those events. And so we see DNA testing as a way to connect these lines of evidence that are already connected by law enforcement. They've already done most of the work. They just need a little bit of DNA testing to push through the wall that has blocked them from making the connection between missing person and unidentified person. This is true for this girl that I talked about who drowned in 1966 in the pool. You might say, how come nobody was missing her? Someone was missing her. She was reported immediately to authorities. Here's the thing. She's from Kansas. She's found at the bottom of a pool in Pecos, Texas, 1966. No internet, very little, communication. Why would they even think to come to Texas to look for her? So DNA testing allows you to connect those events. In the Carla Walker case, we have a guy that has no relation to Carla Walker. It's a wild case. She's in the back of a car. She's in a car with her boyfriend after a Valentine's Day high school dance, making out with them in the car. And as the boyfriend says, this person randomly comes up, opens the door, pulls her out, and runs off with her. It is a crazy story, and it was 100% true. And this person he was like 30 years old, and they were high school kids, and the perpetrator was. And there was no way to connect the lines of evidence because it was really just, an ordinary person doing a terrible thing. And then for the next 46 years, hiding in plain sight. This is, it's even more crazy is that he lived in the same area. So he's probably going to the grocery store, to church. Like, they live within the same couple-mile radius. Fort Worth is a small community there. They're all living in the same, square blocks. And he's probably run into them many times, but I think it would have been hard to identify him. He wasn't in CODIS. He clearly wasn't continuing to offend in a way that was detected. So he never was going to get added to CODIS. He's like 77 years old when they arrested him. But they finally arrested him. They drew the connection. Who knows what else he's done? But at least they now know that he is tied to her. And so that's the magic of DNA testing, is sometimes they can bridge exceptional investigative work that has just not itself been connected because of this separation and folks not knowing each other. So like a random crime or geography or time.
That's fantastic. I mean, Jonathan, what do you think about that as you're kind of looking and listening to all this?
I think it's incredible. And I guess my question is, you said you're the only lab in the U.S. that does all this in-house. You've got a staff of about 20. So how much demand for this kind of capacity is out there that isn't being met just because, most crime labs around the U.S. can't do this?
Yeah, I think there's tremendous demand. I think there should be more labs. We're not the only lab that does this in-house by design. It's just as it turns out, it's new technology, and honestly, it's iterated in our hands. We have cases from 2019. There's a case right now from 2019 that we actually, rejected because the DNA wasn't really suitable. And one thing that's really important to us, and this is true, I think, of most forensic labs, but it's unique to forensic labs, is generally in a forensic lab, you don't take on a good forensic lab. You don't take on casework unless you've worked other casework that's similar, right? Because forensic casework is very different. It's not like a medical test where you swab their mouth. If you drop the DNA on the floor, you get some more DNA. Like this is all you have. It's a finite quantity. So you don't want to run forensic casework through any kind of test unless you know that you've used that test for other casework that was similar and had a good outcome. And so in 2019, we had this case. We didn't feel comfortable running it. We rejected it and said, you need to wait till the technology improves. Well, because we're, the only ones that are doing this in-house right now, we've touched more casework than anybody, like with our own hands, looked at it, really assessed it, shed the tears and the sweat to really figure out how to process this kind of casework, and done a lot of R&D and mock casework. And so last year, we realized, we've now run enough cases of that kind. Now we need to go back. We went back to this case that we rejected and told the guys and said, look, I think we can make a dent in this now. And they said, okay, well, they hadn't sent it anywhere else and they still had it, thank God. So we took the evidence and we had a positive outcome. I can't announce it yet, but it'll be announced soon. It's a case that we turned down in 2019. So even us, as like year by year, we've improved on our ability to at least feel confident in being able to deliver a lead or an answer to law enforcement. And so I just think it's new. I think in the future, you'll have hopefully many labs and many players and many folks working on this. This is a technology that should be deployed everywhere. It should not be one or two companies. It should be lots of groups. And I think to a large extent, law enforcement should get involved in it as well. I think a lot of the DNA testing methods we use are very specialized, but the investigative work of researching family trees, checking records, I think, frankly, the law enforcement folks are better suited to do that work anyway. And so maybe there's a future where we scale up the laboratory process, deploy lots of different facilities that can specialize in getting all that information, unlocking the evidence and retrieving the information that is key to the investigation. But over time, the investigative part shifts more to folks that are trained in how to be investigators, which are going to be detectives and other folks on the law enforcement side. So I think every day about scale, and I definitely would like to see that happen. Do you want to answer this? Do you want me to answer this question?
Yeah, and I want you to also add to that the turnaround time. Someone asked earlier, how long or how quickly can you turn it around?
Sure. So we our business kind of operates like an airline. You could think of it as like Othram Airways, and instead of planes, we have this giant sequencer. It's a huge sequencer in which we batch things onto it. And so, it's like asking how frequently can I fly from here to there? Well, you could fly every day and every hour if you wanted to, but the cost of flying the plane is kind of a fixed cost, right? And what really determines your flight schedule is how many seats can you sell on the plane. And so the same is true in laboratory testing, is that you have this expensive machine that's going to have kind of a flat rate charge. And so turnaround time is generally an optimization of how fast you want it and how much you want to pay for it. And so what we did is we developed a kind of what we think is a good compromise. And right now, our time from evidence hitting our doorstep to evidence leaving the facility, we tell people is about 12 weeks, which is, by the way, a lot faster than a lot of folks can do CODIS testing. I think in Texas, it can take up to like 11 to 13 months to get the results of a CODIS test. The other thing that I'll note is that, there's a lot of variability. Sometimes we work with evidence that's been, chemically damaged or heat damaged. That could take longer than 12 weeks. The Carlo Walker case I keep talking about, that took 5 weeks. So you just don't know. It just depends. If the evidence arrives at the right time and it gets onto the laboratory equipment, and there's nothing really tough with the evidence type, it might be quicker. But I think 12 weeks is a good estimate for turnaround time. Now the investigation that comes post profile is very variable. We've had cases that resolve in hours and cases that resolve in weeks. So, and that's a very interactive process with law enforcement, and it's very specialized. But you should expect to get a profile if the evidence hits our door on day 1 by the end of week 12. So that's that. And then the other question was, why can't DNA be replicated to create more? So when you do CODIS testing, right, you're looking at 20 markers. That's exactly what happens. Is you kind of Xerox copy and replicate those 20 parts of the DNA. You get a lot of it, and even from a small input DNA type, you can still get those markers and do the work you need to do. It's one of the really strong suits of CODIS testing, or what people call STR testing. In the kind of work that we're doing, we're sequencing and sampling information across the entire genome. So there's just not an efficient way to Xerox copy in parallel that many spots of the DNA. We're looking at tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of markers, and there's not a good way to Xerox copy in parallel hundreds of thousands of markers. And so, and there's some problems that arise when you Xerox copy things that I won't go into, just technical challenges that can create bias and noise and other things. And so we prefer to observe information directly from the un-Xerox copy original evidence. And we do our best to do that. Having said that, we've been able to work from 20 human cells. That's about a fifth of a nanogram, which is frankly really the lower limit of CODIS testing. So the methods we use don't require Xerox copying, in that we can meet the same kind of criteria, and sometimes we can go lower than what an STR test would require. It would be great if you could have duplicates of that DNA, but there's just not a feasible way to do that right now.
Wow. Jonathan, any questions?
Earlier you mentioned inadequate and inappropriate techniques. I don't know, were you referring to like DNA collection or analysis efforts that crime labs might be engaging in that maybe are not best practices or might somehow compromise the evidence?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Actually, the crime labs do a great job. The issue is that there's a couple of different ways to assay information from lots of DNA. And there's a technology, some people call them SNP tests, some people call them microarrays, SNP microarrays. These tools were used to power the ancestry market. So Ancestry 23andMe, they use these, they're called like SNP chips. And they're approximate ways to get information that a lot from clean, fresh, high quality and high quantity samples of DNA that you can use to do relationship testing. And I think early on, some folks wanted to use that technology because it makes sense. It was used in genetic genealogy for living people. Why not apply this for crime scenes? And it's just a wholly inappropriate technology. It doesn't work really at all in skeletal remains. There's a lot of challenges with it. And so, when you work on your forensic evidence that is finite and there's not really a known way to like I said, to replicate it, you have to be careful, and you have to take into account success rate. That's really important. Sensitivity, accuracy, and these are all things that are not available on those kind of platforms. So what I meant is that there are non-forensic tools that have been used in the past to try to gauge information from DNA, and some of those tools will work, some of them won't. Some work some of the time, and not other times. These SNP chips that I really dislike, they're also unpredictable. So you don't know if they're going to work or not. One of the cool features of what we do at Othram is that with sequencing, you can predict almost pretty surely up front if it's going to actually work or not. And so you don't have to consume evidence that is likely to succeed, or you can communicate that risk. I like to manage expectations. I don't want to tell the law enforcement, we'll just try something willy-nilly and I hope it works. What we want to do is we want to tell them, here's a likelihood that it's going to work, and let them decide if that's the right way to go. And the other thing is that when the information comes off of a sequencer, one of the cool things about a sequencer is a sequencer will tell you the letters of DNA, but it also, along with it, tells you the confidence in its determination of each letter. And that information is really valuable because you're getting data and then you're getting the confidence letter by letter of that data. That's not true on other kinds of measurement technologies. Real-time PCR, which is how they do like the COVID testing, or these SNP chip microarrays, they just give you an answer. There is no quality associated. So then you don't know if it's going to work. You get data that you're not sure what the quality of that data is. So anyways, I've gone down into the weeds, but my concern is not the crime labs. My concern is using non-forensic methods and applying them to forensic evidence. And I understand it's not a necessity, but that's why we built the forensic lab to do this in-house.
So along those lines, and thanks for clarifying that, do you think there'd be any potential to leverage the existing capability of crime labs and then have you do maybe it's training on how to do genealogical research or something? Like, is there a way that this could be scaled up so that you could help build capacity around the country through maybe training, education?
Yeah, and it's happening already. For example, we have two modes. Law enforcement kind of work their magic to get leads.
Just back up 10 seconds. You froze for a minute. Start your end.
I apologize. What I was going to say is Authrum can operate in two ways. We can produce leads, or we can just produce a profile and let law enforcement work the leads on their own. And we already have agencies, in the US and in Canada. Good example is Toronto Police Service. They've done an amazing job building up their own genealogy unit. And we simply generate profiles. Here in the United States, we work with the Bureau. The Bureau has built an amazing investigative capability, and they should advertise it more. But they know how to do genealogy. They work a lot of these cases. There's a case on DNA Solves that you can look up. Siobhan Mcginnis. This is a little girl. She was 5 years old, raped and murdered, again by someone that didn't know her, just a random passerby. And we built the profile, but we didn't do the records research. That actually went to the Bureau, and the local agency, in collaboration with the Bureau, both of them together in Missoula, Montana, worked that case, and they deserve all the credit. They're the ones that solved the case. Our focus is on producing the profile, because if you have a clean profile, if you have good quality data, you can do wonderful things. If your data is crap, then that's where you start spending years trying to sort. Is this a real match? Is it not a real match? Did I not detect the match because there's too much noise? The whole premise of relationship testing is that if Mike and I are related, we'll share lots of DNA. If I errors and noise and other stuff, then all of a sudden Mike and I are related as we really are. And so that's a risk in relationship testing.
This has been amazing. And let's see, do all 20 of your people have your background, David? We're going to use that as the last question, and then we're going to wrap up this section, move into something else. Do all 20 of your staff have the same credentials you have?
Most of us come from a medical or research background. Not all of us are I'm a geneticist. I trained at Baylor College of Medicine, and so I have a PhD in genetics. So that's I have a few other folks along with that background. Over 20 years ago. So we have a background that's similar. There's other folks that have been related other our sales and queues up cases. He's not a geneticist, but he's been immersed in DNA testing in the medical market for the last decade. Our programmers have worked both in academic settings and also in research settings doing DNA analysis. So we may come from different educational backgrounds, but yeah, most of the 20 of us have been immersed for at least a decade in some aspect tangibly related to DNA testing or DNA analysis. And so, that's why I said, we're all passionate, it comes from the heart. My sales guy was doing medical testing before. He's on fire about bringing value. Oh, what?
I said, you can tell you're passionate. And you know what? The timing is perfect, because we actually are having a little bit of a bandwidth problem with you, which is great. I think we've got most of that last minute's worth, but I just want to maybe ask you to come back, because we just got to have you back, David. Will you come back?
Yeah, anytime.
Oh, that's great. Folks, I don't know, David, if we're going to even be able to keep you on, but folks, you can find David at dnasolves.com or through his screen name. Make sure I know this. I've got this right, David, because I didn't quite understand it. Evolvability is your screen name in Twitter and all these.
Yeah, you can catch me on Twitter, but frankly, the best way to follow us is to follow our Authrum account. So it's Authrum, OTHREM Tech. So Authrum Tech is our Facebook and Twitter handle, and then DNASolves.com. And we'll generally announce things on DNA Solves and then also Twitter and Facebook. But yeah, my personal handle, I sometimes retweet the news, but I'm boring to follow. You should follow Othram. It's Othram Tech, and so happy to engage with any and all of you on Twitter, Facebook, or come to DNA Solve, see what we're doing, and join in. And I'm happy to come back. I'll bring a bigger internet connection next time.
That'll be awesome. And Mom Jeans and Crime Scenes threw up your website.
Oh, very appreciative. Yeah, I appreciate anyone that even talks about a case or spreads the word, because, like I said, you just don't know. You just don't know what clue or what piece of information is going to lead to the solving of these cases. And so, just extreme gratitude to you and everyone that shares these stories in the website, because we want to do as much as we can, like I said, for as many cases as we can.
Well, no, we appreciate it. And if you haven't seen, it's streaming in, bring you back. So we'll have to do that. And we'll make sure that we get a chance to do that. I just can't thank you enough. And by the way, Melody McAtee popped up $20 for the Diet Dr. Pepper Fund, David. So I'll even take care of the sodas next time when you come. So
hey, great. I appreciate you having me, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks. Have a good night. Thank you.
Too.
Wow, Jonathan, that guy's amazing, isn't he?
Incredible.
So folks, let's kind of loosen up and just talk. I want to have you filling in the blanks here. I want to see some discussion going on in the chat window. Jonathan and I have a couple of things that we wanted to talk about, but I just found that so interesting. And if you haven't taken a moment, go open your phone. If you have an iPhone, all you have to do is open your camera app and hold it up to the screen, and you'll be able to capture this QR code, where if you've ever been victimized, you can go in and put a little information in. And maybe in just a second, I want to talk about one subject in Florida, Jonathan, and then maybe we could pull up the map and just look at that real quick and see if people are weighing in on this. And you'll love seeing it, because it's a good old-fashioned Esri dashboard. So first thing I wanted to talk about is I don't know if you caught that Florida Governor DeSantis has signed this controversial anti-riot bill. Some people are really unhappy about it. Others are thrilled. I mean, we had so many cities, including Chicago, every major city in the United States, that suffered from riots last year. And we probably are on the verge of that happening again in Minneapolis and other major cities. What do you think about that bill?
I was just reading through some of the highlights today, actually. I know a lot of civil rights groups oppose it. I know that it increases law enforcement's power to crack down on civil unrest that may, some people argue, infringe on the rights of the protesters. And you're always trying to balance the need for order with the need to allow people to peacefully protest, which, as you said, unfortunately, many cities have seen unlawful protests that have resulted in looting and injury, and in some cases even death, certainly destruction of property. So, I don't think anybody supports that. Nobody in law enforcement does. Does this go too far? I'd be curious to hear your take on it. I was just reading that it even includes a provision that misdemeanor arrests related to the protests can't get bail till their first court appearance, and that civil immunity is granted to people who drive through protesters blocking a road. So does that go too far? Again, I'd be curious to hear what the audience thinks, and Mike, also what you think. You're a former cop as well.
Well, I've been privileged to be, for instance, in Chicago during the marathon, and been with your team inside the command center and down there at the race, and seen big crowds. I come from a city, we have about 280,000 people. You have that at lunchtime in downtown Chicago. You deal with this where it can really spin out. And I remember just being in Chicago a few years ago during IACP, folks, that's the International Chiefs Conference, when the protests were going on. And I think I'm trying to think who was the director at the time.
I think it was this was Eddie Johnson, because it was October of 2019.
There you go. Yeah. And you guys went in and you just had to shut it down, because those things those things can spin out of control so quickly.
Yeah, and again, to your point, Chicago and other big cities have a lot of experience with that, and there's usually designated protest areas, and generally people are peaceful. They're expressing their First Amendment right to convey their opinions. But again, when it starts crossing that line to becoming an illegal act, I was stuck on the expressway not long ago during some protest activity, and the entire expressway was shut down. Now, do I personally think that motorists should be allowed to drive into the protests? No, but that's what, I think that's why some people might suggest that this legislation may go a little bit too far.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I mean, how do you handle folks in those protests? I was thinking back, I was the commander of a major event. We had about 750,000 people attending the event. It was over the course of several weeks. There were protest sites that we had set up, and we kind of took a forward-thinking approach based on something I'd learned in Seattle, and we were taking golf carts over on a regular basis full of waters and everything else we could to just try to kind of humanize and keep the connection between our efforts and what the protesters were wanting to do. But I don't know, what's the way that you de-escalate without it ever getting to the point that you have to de-escalate?
Yeah, and to that point, hopefully there are reasonable people on both sides that can come together and reach an agreement and agree on where the protest is going to be, and if there's going to be a march or a demonstration, how it's going to be routed. And you talked about the marathon that you were at here in Chicago. I think you were here a couple of years for that. So that those events, when you can pre-plan them and when you can reach agreement and consensus, they can work really well. But you see what happens when there are some people that are just they're not going to follow the law. They're not going to compromise. They're not going to work with law enforcement. Their purpose is to commit crime. So I don't know what the solution there is. I mean, in my personal opinion is if somebody breaks the law, they should go to jail if it's a serious criminal offense. And some people you can't reach agreement with.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Well, so, and folks, please fill in on the chat what your thoughts are on this, and then to the back office, please make sure that they're popped up on the screen if it's something that Jonathan and I can chat about. But this is probably a perfect way to segue into the Chauvin case. But here we have Joycatcher who's saying there's a time and place for some things. People feel as they do, but their actions have ripple effects. Yeah, isn't that the truth? I mean, the protests we're seeing are based on real emotion, and we can't discount that emotion and pain, but that doesn't authorize you to break the law.
Yeah, exactly. And I see some other chat comments about, obviously driving into a crowd is not the appropriate response. To me, that's where that legislation might be a little bit extreme.
Yeah. Well, did you get a chance to catch any of the closing arguments today in the show?
I was between meetings. I was trying to catch a little bit of it. It's in the hands of the jury now, and hopefully the jury they're reasonable people. To me, and again, this is just my personal opinion. Obviously, I wasn't there, but based on everything that I saw, based on the pretty extensive interviews with witnesses and video footage, to me, it seemed like that the actions taken were, especially when the subject was not an active resistor anymore, were probably not compliant with the use of force model. And I don't know if we could show the screen. This is something that this was actually shown today during the trial, during the closing arguments. If we could show my, there it is. So if you notice this on the left, you see the subject's actions. So this is designed to show police officers what force is appropriate based on the subject's action. So you see towards the left, it's a little hard to read it, but passive resistance, hopefully just your presence alone is enough to gain compliance. You can use verbalization. Then there's some other compliance techniques you can use. Once you get up to active resistance, then you can use things like controlled takedowns And then when you move up to active aggression, then you can use even more force. But it appears at least that the subject's actions at the time of the knee on the neck, the subject was a passive resistor at that point. One interesting note about this model is that you can see that the model just escalates, right? So like you see subject on the left and you see two arrows pointing up. So one of the critiques that I've heard of depicting the use of force model in this way is that it makes it seem like you can't go back down. Like you see the subject is just getting, first they're passive, then they might be active, in active resistor, then they become an active aggressor. But the model doesn't clearly show that you can go down. This next screen I'm going to show is another use of force model. This is from John Desmet. And this is a model that Chicago happens to use. And again, you can see that the model, it's pretty similar, where it just starts at the lower left and then it goes up. What I thought was interesting, and this is what some conversations that I've been involved with have talked about, is maybe instead of being a model that seems to show that things just escalate, that it should be more of a circle to show that the subject's actions have to be continuously reviewed and evaluated, which they do. I mean, all the training says that. But this model, some people argue, shows that more clearly and makes it even more obvious that this is it's a continuous assessment of the subject's actions. And this is from Canada, obviously from our RCMP.
Well, and it requires, I mean, I remember I got a private pilot license when I was younger, and part of the training was that you're constantly going in a rotation through everything that you're facing. You're looking at what's going on outside. You're looking at your gauges. You're looking at where your manual gauges are, where the items that you can manipulate are, and you're constantly scanning around and around. And that's really what's required in force issues. And I liked how you brought that up in the very beginning as we looked at that first chart, was that you can move back and forth based on what the subject that you're dealing with is doing. And I didn't have any problems with this case until that final 2 minutes, Jonathan, when they're saying, I don't feel a pulse. And that's the part that I guess I'm just so troubled by.
Yeah, and the law in Minnesota, I'm going to read it right now. It defines chokeholds as a method by which a person applies sufficient pressure to a person to make breathing difficult or impossible, and includes, but it is not limited to, any pressure on the neck, throat, or windpipe. So that's prohibited. And just my view of it, and I'm not a forensics expert, but my view of it was that, to your point, at that time, it was excessive.
Yeah. And when you and I went through the police academy, we were actually taught that chokehold and how to do that if you were in a fight and you needed to gain control. It's been interesting to watch how this thing's evolved, but I found it interesting that in 2013, the second largest suit that Minneapolis has faced is for this very same kind of event. Prone asphyxiation concerns. And obviously the city, even though they paid out a lot of money in 2013, didn't ban that then. It remained as part of the training and probably will remain part of that training, that positional asphyxiation challenge of having someone face down when you're getting control of them. I wondered if you had seen that and what you thought about the fact that just 7 years ago, they were in the same problem that they now were condemning their officer for.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, and I didn't even realize that until you just brought it up. But I think clearly after this case, there's going to be some review of training and policy. And as one of the audience members commented, the good cops are walking on eggshells right now, which is true, because as we all know, 99.999% of cops, vast majority of cops, are good. So this is the kind of thing that, whenever you see an officer that's doing something that you don't think is right, it's something that distresses, I think, all the good cops, just as it distresses the public, the community who the police serve.
Yeah. And that's such a great segue to talk about the fact that cops are walking on eggshells. They don't feel like they have the backing of their command staff. They don't feel like they have the backing of their elected officials, and we're seeing that happen. We had this shooting in your town, Chicago, of this 13-year-old gang member packing a gun. How anyone could expect that officer to know this is a 13-year-old in the dark running with a weapon in their hand. But now this barrage of challenge that's coming down. And I found it interesting that the president of the police union was the first one on CNN standing up for the officer. As a former commander, I don't know. I thought that was risky of the police president to get on, but
yeah, I mean, and I'm not going to go into the specifics of the case just because it's still under active investigation. But as you said, police officers have to make split-second decisions that we get to dissect for hours and hours and hours and weeks and months afterwards. So without commenting on the specific case, I will say, and this, foot chases are inherently dangerous, and a lot of departments are evaluating their foot chase policies. And I think Chicago is one of them. I know CPD put out a training bulletin in February of this year, but there's no actual department order on foot chases. We'll see if anything changes going forward. But a lot of departments. I was just researching this earlier. Baltimore. These are just a few that I happen to see. Baltimore, Portland, LA County Sheriff. LA, for example, says that deputies chasing a subject alone have to terminate the chase if the subject runs into a building, woods, or other isolated area. So it's a safety issue for everybody, for the public, for the suspect, for the officer. So as with any event, you evaluate it for training and policy implications, and hopefully that's a way that law enforcement keeps getting better.
It's really an interesting thing, because I find myself on this fence that I can't fall one way or another off of. But I think back, I mean, when we were rookies, Jonathan, backing off of a foot chase or a fight in an alley, even if you were alone, wasn't an option. You were considered the last line of defense. And now we're telling officers, don't pursue in a vehicle because it's a liability issue. Don't run down an alley. At what point do we empower the criminals then just to run on every incident?
Yeah, that's a good question. And just the complexity of policies and procedures now. I remember seeing an old copy of the department rules, I think, that was put out in the 19th century, and it was an index card, and I think there were maybe 13 or 14 rules. Now the big departments have orders and procedures that are literally thousands and thousands of pages. So just the level of complexity continues to increase, which also increases the need for training. So it's a challenging environment for officers, for sure.
Yeah, that's tough. And then I'll tell you what, I don't know about you, but don't you think every cop in the world, when in the suburbs of Minneapolis, the officer deployed her weapon instead of her taser last week? I mean, holy cow. I just think how grateful I am that some of the mistakes I made in my career didn't have the ramifications that officer's facing right now.
Yeah, that was stunning to see. And, a lot of people that I've talked to have, and this too, have reinforced the need for training. How often do you qualify on a taser? I think it's a, at least when I was there, it was a 1-year annual qualification requirement. That maybe it's something that officers need more practice, more training. I'm not saying that was the case here because I wasn't there, and I don't have access to all the data in that case. But training is just so important, and I think it's something that's neglected. When you look at departments that go under consent decrees around the country, one of the number one issues that always comes up consistently is training. It's one of the first things that comes up.
So here's a question for you. How did you feel about the news, maybe a week or 10 days ago, and I think it was in Portland, where they said, we're now going to put a whole bunch of money into unarmed, undertrained personnel in the parks to help solve the gun problem.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting mix of unarmed personnel dealing with guns. I'm all for looking at other intervention strategies, like we talked about earlier with Anna. But I'm not sure that putting an unarmed civilian in the potential way of harm from guns. But I do think, as you know, a vast majority of 911 calls are not criminal. Most of what the police get involved with is not criminal. So I do think there needs to be other intervention capabilities that don't put the person providing the interventions at unnecessary risk. Of course, there's always going to be some risk, but I'm not sure I would put unarmed civilians in that role.
Yeah, agreed. Well, what kind of stuff's been on your mind lately? Anything big you've wanted to talk about?
No, I mean, I think this is great. I think, having this kind of dialogue is really important. I think it's important for the police to get as much community legitimacy as possible. And I think in order to do that, police have to be as transparent as possible. So sharing information about training, sharing information about the kind of risks that police officers face every day, hopefully getting the public's help, the public support. The police are a part of and empowered by the community. I saw some comments along those lines as we were talking. It's just so important to have those kinds of partnerships. So I'm always looking for ways that they can be strengthened. To me, that's what's really going to be critical going forward, especially with all the challenges that police are facing now.
Yeah, agreed. Well, hey, in the back office, guys, if we could pull up the map with Victims' Rights Week this week, running all week long. Again, the numbers are phenomenally high when you think about it. Looks like 20 people is all over the course of the hour that we've been together, dialed in. But this is kind of cool because we're going to let this run all week long, Jonathan. It's going to be just a place where people can dial in. If you click on one of those red points on the map, fellas, it'll pop up with the same information that can be read down below, but people can go in and see below the map. You can see there's an area where people can go through and read what people have put about their own case. What I did in there, Jonathan, was I just gave people a chance to share a little bit about what happened to them. We asked them not to put their names or anything else, and then below what happened to them, what they've done differently in their life to reduce the possibility of being victimized in that kind of situation again. So hopefully it becomes something that's a little bit beneficial. And then, of course, what's a map without gauges and buttons and so if we want to go in and look at just a certain kind of thing on the pie chart, we can click on that. If we click, oh, there you go, guys. Yeah, everything changes. So hopefully, folks, you'll go out and spend a little time and interact with the map and share with your friends if it's not useful. The beauty of all of this is it's pretty easy to do, so we can do some. Oh, we even got somebody in Australia. Looks like up in Norway or someplace like that up on top. And then that one there is someone who didn't put an address in because that's the old Esri middle of the world button. So anyway, hopefully folks, you'll take advantage of that. And let's just go through, Jonathan, see if there's anything on here that somebody's written that you want to talk about. Otherwise, we'll figure out what we're going to do next time around. Let's see. People just talking about the map. Let's see here.
Here's someone, I think cops should get training every year. Yeah, definitely. Totally agree. In Illinois, there's some legislation that just passed that's requiring that, even more training.
Yeah. Sophia H is saying what we were theorizing about. If we put all these policies in place, are criminals just going to start running into buildings and call it their safe zone?
Hopefully not.
Hopefully it's not my building if that's the case. Oh, that's amazing. Well, Jonathan, I'll tell you, I can't thank you enough. I know that we've got a couple of things in the works where we're going bring in maybe one of the chiefs that we've worked with and chat. But anything happening on the FirstNet network that you want to share?
I would encourage people to go to firstnet.gov. There's a lot of exciting things. One of the coolest things, and Mike, you'll appreciate this because it relates to mapping, is Z-axis. So vertical location tracking, which is a huge safety plus for first responders. A vendor called NextNav now has this in every major city in the U.S. For example, Chicago has over 1,000 buildings that are over 75 feet tall. So we've been able to track first responders' XY coordinates, where they are on a map for a long time, but we haven't been able to track their vertical axis. So if they're in a big building and they need help and maybe they don't know exactly what floor they're on, the dispatcher doesn't know where they are. Here's a way where if they have this technology, they can call for help, and within accuracy of 3 meters or better, we can tell what floor they're on. So we've been doing a bunch of webinars. There's a lot of interest on that. And the cool thing is just about any smartphone will work. You don't need fancy equipment as long as it has a barometric pressure sensor, which every smartphone built in the last 6 or 7 years has, including my old iPhone 8 Plus that I still carry. So I've used this old device on some actual webinars. So it's very cool. It ties into mapping. You can imagine like a 3D image of a building and then showing where the first responder is. So that's one of the more exciting things that is emerging right now for us.
Well, isn't that going to be something when you lose connectivity with somebody, firefighter, for instance, and you need to get in the building and find where they are and minimize the risk for those other firefighters that need to find them and pull them out? Something like that is going to be just amazing.
Absolutely. But yeah, I would encourage people, if you have an interest, firstnet.gov, and you can see all the latest technology that's coming out. That's
great. Well, on that, let's give them a look at kind of what that all will look like for this new generation of first responders. I actually just pulled something up while you were talking, and you and I have gone through this before and talked about it as part of the entire FirstNet effort. But what we're looking at here is downtown San Diego, and it's showing the community in 3D. It's showing the location of every police call that's coming in right now. And if we go to those individually, it's actually showing that range you were talking about as a bubble, and says, hey, that particular caller, based on the cellular network in that area or Wi-Fi in the building or whatever else, is somewhere in this range. But what you're talking about with what NextNav is doing has been really exciting, because they're going to be able to have a tighter integration and almost a mesh of information bouncing back and forth to help them locate people, right?
Absolutely. Yep. And again, before NextNav came out with this technology, you would have had to put equipment in each of the high-rise buildings on multiple floors to be able to generate that kind of location information. This is using existing towers, and you don't need to put any special equipment inside these buildings, which, as you can imagine, would be very cost prohibitive. So it's covering an entire metropolitan area. And again, every major metro area in the U.S. is already covered now.
That's fantastic. I don't know. I was going to show you this because I don't know if you've seen it, but we now have gotten to where we can start tearing these things apart and slicing through the building to actually look at each floor individually too, so we can start identifying where officers are or other kinds of things on the fly. So it's an exciting time for law enforcement, for public safety. And what you are doing at FirstNet is changing the world. Again, I think about, for instance, Minneapolis. The jury has called it a night, so they're going to go through the night, and thankfully, I think thankfully, wait till tomorrow for that deliberation to continue. Whether they get an answer tomorrow or not, who knows? But all of a sudden, you get a lot of people in that downtown area, and what happens to the cellular network?
Yeah, I mean, and that's over dependence on technology. I mean, you do have to have resiliency and redundancy, and that's one of the great things about FirstNet is that it does. And we're not talking about replacing the voice radio that the officers carry today. So this is yet another way that you can communicate in addition to the voice radio. It's, this network is designed to augment it, not replace it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Chief Jonathan Lewin, thank you so much for taking time and coming on Profiling Evil tonight. I'm going to plan on you soon to get back on with us. And it's always a thrill for me to have you on. I love your insights.
Appreciate it, Mike. This has been fun.
Thank you. And folks, thanks for supporting Profiling Evil. We launched episode 8 of Mapping Evil. Make sure you go to your favorite podcast platform. That launched about 4 hours ago, and catch the latest version. And I think I received a note that our downloads are just going through the roof. We're now number 3 or 4 or 5, somewhere like that, on Apple for downloads. So we're excited about that. And then check out profilingevil.com. And we'll see you next Monday for choir practice. Thanks so much, everybody. And thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Mike. Be safe.